You know, in the 15 years I've been on YouTube, I don't think I've ever talked about Armored Core. Which is very surprising to me because I fucking love this game. Like, this is one of my top 5 favorites from not only my childhood, but probably of all time, standing right up there alongside Tomb Raider 2 and Army Men 3D. I've been a fan ever since I got my first PlayStation for my birthday back in 1998. There was a demo disc with it, a disc I still have, and one of those demos was Armored Core. And come to think of it, that disc also introduced me to Tomb Raider because there was a demo of Tomb Raider 2 on there. They were my favorite demos, especially Armored Core, because it's the only demo I found on any demo disc I've played that doesn't throw you back to the main menu if you leave it alone for a couple of minutes. There were only 2 levels and nothing else besides the shop and garage worked, but that was okay for me as a kid. I played the shit out of it, so big surprise, I eventually got the full game and loved that even more. I went back and played through it recently for the first time in who knows how many years, possibly decades, and it's not that different from what I remember. As far as the story goes, Armored Core is set about 50 years after a war known as the Great Destruction completely destroyed the surface of the planet. People were driven underground, now they're trying to rebuild, and there's a war stirring up between the 2 biggest corporations who have helped the most with rebuilding, known as Chrome and Murakumo Millennium. They also have their own terrorist faction that they equip and supply to sabotage the other. You play as the newest member of a faction called the Ravens, a group of people who have giant mechs called Armored Cores, and they take any job if you pay them enough, and that's about it. There's no characters to speak of, your character is non-existent, there's hardly any cutscenes, and what few of them there are, they tell you next to nothing. Most of the story is told to you through mission briefings and emails you sometimes get after completing them. I didn't even know the basic premise I just told you until after I read it in a manual. Yeah, Armored Core was never known for its story, but I still wish there was one. There's so many opportunities here for some great storytelling, and it doesn't have to be character-focused, it can be about the world itself. You know, what daily life in this world is like, because you come across so many relics from the past in a bunch of these levels, and there's even one where you go into a space station to destroy the gun that caused the Great Destruction. But no such luck. Anyways, as far as graphics go, Armored Core looks like a standard PS1 game on the technical front. Lots of aliasing, textures warping into each other, clipping issues, choppy frame rate. It's all here, but it doesn't look so bad if you're playing on the DuckStation emulator with all of the improvements turned on, which I am, and yes, CPU overclocking does work here. Art-wise, it's a mixed bag. Some of the levels look really boring, especially on the space station. You've got like 3 or 4 levels on there, and it all looks the fucking same. Not only that, but most of the doors don't open, so have fun navigating that mess. But there are some good-looking levels too. A couple of them also look like they were taken from Kingsfield, which, fun fact, this game was made by From Software, the same guys who brought us Kingsfield and later Dark Souls. That, and I suppose the designs for the enemies, weapons, and pretty much everything else, that's good too. As far as the sound goes, voice acting is a cross between being just there and phoned in. Most of the sound effects are passable with a few decent ones, the weapons range from sounding weak to nice and punchy, and some of the music is pretty catchy. When it's down to gameplay, Armored Core is all about building your AC and taking it out on missions to earn money so you can make your AC better. For most of the levels, you just destroy a bunch of stuff, but you occasionally guard something, and there's a couple other really cool levels I won't spoil. What I find interesting is that you get offers from both corporations because the Ravens don't take any side, they go where the money is. For example, at one point you're offered 2 opposing contracts, one where you look for and attack a factory entrance, or guard that same factory entrance depending on which one you take. Another example is where you have to break into a place and release a bioweapon, and then you'll get an offer from the folks who own the place you just broke into to go back in and contain it. So you get paid to make a mess, and then get paid again by the same people you just screwed over to clean up the mess you made. And they have no clue it was you. Fucking hysterical, I love it. Now, if you pick enough contracts from one corporation, the contracts from the other one will become unavailable, but this isn't as extreme as it sounds. It's not like if you complete 5 or 6 Murakumo levels, you won't be able to work for Chrome for the rest of the game. You get levels in sets, so you'll still be able to take contracts from whoever you want later down the line. I like this because it gives you an opportunity to skip levels that fucking suck. As a kid, there were a few times where I encountered a level I didn't like, so I took all the other levels, and after enough times that level disappeared, And I was like, oh, thank the gods. But there's also times where you have to complete all contracts from both sides before you can move on, and there were a couple levels I had to complete that I really didn't want to. But oddly enough, this doesn't have any effect on the story. That war that's stirring up between the two corporations, depending on which one you complete the most contracts for, they win when the war starts, but the entire war is a single level where you destroy 3 robots, and that's it. It's still the same set of ending levels right after that, no matter which corporation you side with, and nothing else. There's not even multiple endings for reasons I won't spoil. Although I recommend siding with Murakumo Millennium because not only will you not have to go through all those space station levels that I talked about earlier, I also find they have the better and less annoying levels in general. But the core experience here, pun intended, is of course, building your armored core. Now, to any newcomer, it can be overwhelming at first with the seemingly endless ways you can build, and it only got more complicated as the years went by and more games got released. But it's not so much the actual building, it's everything else. Building here is pretty simple. When you boil it down to the baseline, there's only 3 ways you can build, because there's only 3 cores to choose from. You've got a light, middle, and heavyweight. You could argue that there's other ways because you've got 4 types of legs, but there's still only 3 weight classes, and let's be real here, you're not going to go attaching a bunch of lightweight gear to a set of tank treads. Then again, maybe you are if you want to experiment. After all, that's part of the experience here. Now, when it comes to putting it all together, you've got your head, core, arms, and legs, then you've got your generator, which determines how much energy you have, you've got your fire control system, which controls how big your area of targeting is, and how far away you can target enemies from, then you've got your boosters, which should be self-explanatory, and you've got your weapons. The right arm is where all your small weapons go, machine gun, sniper rifle, bazooka. The left arm is where all the energy swords, or laser blades as they're called, go. And on the back is where all your heavy weapons go, like your missile launchers or your radar if your head part doesn't have one. And there's even some weapons that use both slots. And then you've got your optional parts, which the core dictates how many slots you have to put optional parts in, and they do things like decrease the amount of energy you use when firing energy weapons, increasing your resistance to shell-based weapons, things like that. And if you're an artist of any kind, you can also change the color of your mech. You've got a number of pre-made camo patterns to choose from, or you can manually change the color like I did. And you also have a number of pre-made emblems, or you can make your own, or mod the existing ones like it really fucking matters. But where it gets really tricky is you need to keep tabs on all of the stats for your parts. For example, with the head parts, you need to check if it has a radar and what type of area map it has, because I forgot to mention, every mission has a map you can pull up by pressing the select button, but some heads will only keep track of the current room you're in, and once you leave that room, that memory data is gone. But the ones that say area memory will keep track of the whole thing. Also, some of them have a biosensor which will allow you to track non-mechanical things, because you fight organic enemies in this game as well for a few of the levels. And some of them won't, so you won't be able to lock onto them, which makes any missile launcher useless, because you can't fire them unless you have a lock on. You'll still be able to attack them with any weapon that can fire line of sight, but you'll have to manually aim the gun. Sound complicated? It is, because those are just the head parts. Now, if you want to get right into playing the game with the absolute minimum and don't want to spend all this time worrying about the small things, you just need to make sure your mech is not overweight and that your generator has enough energy to power everything. If those conditions aren't met, you can't play any missions. But those are the only 2 things that will outright stop you from being able to play. Although I don't recommend doing this, because you will have a much harder time than you would if you take the time to learn the finer points. Because going back to the biosensor, whenever I took a mission that involved organic enemies, I took a head part that didn't have one, because I only had to destroy certain enemies, and when I had a biosensor equipped, the camera was constantly locking onto every enemy that was behind a wall or in a different room, and it got really annoying trying to move around with the camera going every which way. I found that when I didn't have a biosensor, it was much easier to go through the level. It's not like firing line of sight was any big challenge. None of the organic enemies can fly, they're all slow as molasses, and most of them are very small and don't do much damage, so I could easily fly past them. Like I said, it helps to learn the finer points. Now when it's down to playing the game, sorry to say, but it doesn't get any easier. Armored Core was released in July 1997, a month before the DualShock controller hit the market, so there's no twin-stick setup here for the controls. In fact, for some odd reason, Armored Core wouldn't have a twin-stick setup until Nexus in 2004. Weird, I know. And the controls here are awkward at best if you're not used to them. Pushing up and down on the D-pad moves your mech forward and back, and left and right simply turns it instead of strafing. To strafe, you use the L1 and R1 buttons, and to move the camera up and down, you have to use the L2 and R2 buttons. You boost with the X button, fire your weapon with the square button, the laser blade with the circle button, and you cycle through your weapons with the triangle button. Yeah, the camera controls kinda suck, but it's not as bad as it might seem, because most of the AI is pretty basic. Most of the ground enemies totter in place trying to hit you with their weak weapons, so all you have to do is strafe a little, shooting them until they die, which doesn't take long, and for the enemies that can fly, you just have to wait for a solid red lock, and you can drop them without too much trouble, so most of the time, you don't have to move the camera all that much. The only time the controls get in the way is when you're fighting another Armored Core, because they like to zip around all over the damn place. Now, if you're fighting in a big open area, it's not so bad because you can fly away from them and keep them in your line of sight. Or if you're in a small hallway, they can't really zip around. But if you're fighting in a small area with some room to move around, then it can get pretty irritating because the camera likes to spaz out if you get backed into a wall or a corner, and if you manage to get out, you can't turn very quickly, which doesn't help. So, until you figure out what you're doing, Armored Core can be an annoying and sometimes frustrating game on your first playthrough. Don't be surprised if you find yourself constantly tweaking and sometimes even completely reconfiguring your Armored Core for a new mission. But you know what? I'm okay with that, because once you figure the game out, it's an absolute blast, and it also gives you the feeling that you've learned how to pilot an incredibly complex machine. Now, is Armored Core worth checking out? I would say yes, because if nothing else, there's no other game out there quite like it, unless you count MechWarrior. But if you like that game, think of this as taking the console version of MechWarrior 2 and making the pace of the combat even faster. And if you end up liking this game, there's 2 expansion packs for even more fun. And the best part is you can transfer everything you have from this game over to either one of them if you like. But that is a story for another time. Alright kids, thanks for watching. If you're already subbed to the channel or are about to, be sure to hit the bell so you get notified when I post a video, hit the like button, and give me some feedback. I don't care if it's good or bad.